He walked onto the lot to trade in a rusted van and walked out humiliated. But fate parked the one thing that would change everything right in front of him. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe kindness and courage still open doors. The sun was already unforgiving, casting waves of heat off the hood of Drew Carter's van as he pulled into the dealership parking lot. It sputtered one final time, gave a wheezing cough, and went quiet as if it, too, had decided it had had enough. Drew sat for a moment, with his hands still gripping the steering wheel, watching the reflection of his own face in the dusty windshield. A patchy beard, tired eyes, sweat creeping down his temples. His 6-year-old son Liam sat quietly beside him, clutching a ragged stuffed otter with one missing eye. Drew looked over at his boy and offered the smallest smile he could manage. "You ready, buddy?" Liam nodded, trusting, innocent, and completely unaware of how impossible this visit might turn out to be. Drew stepped out first, opening the creaky passenger door for Liam and helping him down. He straightened his faded t-shirt, ran a hand over his short-cropped hair, and tried to make himself look like someone who belonged here. He didn't. The dealership gleamed in the sun like it belonged to another plain-trove of new SUVs and sports cars lined in precision, their spotless windshields reflecting a different kind of life. The showroom windows shimmered with oversized posters of smiling families and perfectly pressed salesmen offering deals that were always a little too good to be true. Drew took Liam's hand and walked toward the front entrance, ignoring the way the heat rose off the asphalt like steam from a boiling pot. Inside, the contrast hit him instantly. Air conditioning blasted his skin. Everything was clean, white, polished. The floor gleamed like water. Music played low from invisible speakers, upbeat and commercial. A group of salesmen stood near a sleek black coupe, laughing at something on a phone. They didn't notice Drew at first. Then they did. One of them, a tall guy with slick hair and a tailored shirt, raised his eyebrows. "Help you with something?" he asked, already smirking. "Looking to talk to someone about a trade-in," Drew said, adjusting his grip on Liam's hand. The guy glanced past Drew, out the glass doors, to the van still steaming quietly in the parking lot. A beat passed. He blinked, then looked back at his colleagues. One of them chuckled under his breath. "Sure. What's the vehicle?" the first guy asked, barely keeping the laughter from his voice. "That old Dodge out there," Drew replied. "Couple 100,000 miles, but I've kept the engine clean. Needs a new radiator, but—" He was interrupted by the second salesman, a guy with a sharp jaw and 2 white teeth. "That thing made it here under its own power? I owe you $10, Craig." More laughter. Drew's jaw tensed, but he didn't respond. He was used to this. He'd been used to it since the layoffs, since his wife passed, since the world stopped treating him like someone who might deserve a break. Craig crossed his arms and gave a little shrug, like he was humoring a child's request. "Look, we're not really in the market for vintage right now. But we've got some great lease programs if you're interested in something new." Drew felt the sting of humiliation press against his chest. His back teeth clenched. He glanced down at Liam, who was now looking at the cars instead of the men. That was the only mercy in the moment. "Thanks," Drew said quietly. "I'll think about it." He turned and walked out slowly, guiding Liam with him, refusing to let them see the heat rising in his face. Outside, the sun hit hard again, but the air at least felt real, honest. The van looked even sadder in comparison to the dealership's glossy facade. He was reaching for the door handle when he heard a faint tapping sound, then another. It wasn't coming from his van. He turned. A luxury SUV was parked awkwardly just outside the delivery zone, its windows slightly tinted. Through the glass, he saw her. A girl, maybe 5 or 6, was inside, her face flushed red, her hands slapping the inside of the window. The glass fogged with every breath. She wasn't just locked in, she was panicking. Drew ran to the vehicle, tried the door, locked. The sun had turned the inside of the SUV into an oven. He pounded on the glass, trying to get her attention, to calm her. but she was crying hard now, her little fists hitting the window in desperation. There was no adult nearby. No one was watching. "Hey, this kid's stuck in here," Drew shouted toward the showroom. No one moved. He looked around, heart racing. There was no time. He took a half step back, pulled off his elbow brace, and smashed it into the rear passenger window. The first strike cracked it. The second shattered it. Shards rained down as the door finally clicked open from the inside, and Drew reached in, careful but swift, lifting the girl gently into his arms. Her skin was damp with sweat. She clung to him without hesitation, breathing in short, sharp gasps, her small chest heaving against his. A salesman appeared in the doorway at last. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" "She was locked in," Drew yelled back. "She couldn't breathe." Others spilled out behind the man, their voices rising in confusion and anger. Some had their phones out already. Drew was still holding the girl, trying to soothe her, when a woman's scream cut through the noise. "Ava!" The crowd split like water as a woman in a pale blue dress and high heels sprinted forward. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, but strands had come loose and clung to her face. She rushed to Drew, took the girl from his arms, and fell to the ground with her, cradling her, whispering her name over and over through sobs. "I'm okay, Mommy," the girl murmured. "I got too hot." Drew stepped back, his hands bloody from the broken glass, sweat pouring down his face. He could feel the crowd's attention shifting. The anger disappeared. Whispers turned to questions. One of the salesmen lowered his phone. The woman looked up at Drew, her makeup streaked with tears, her chest still heaving. You got her out?" she asked. He nodded once. "She was locked in. I didn't see anyone around." She stood slowly, holding her daughter tight, and looked him straight in the eye. There was something in her face that didn't match the luxury or the heels or the expensive jewelry. It was raw, it was real, and it was grateful. "My name's Celeste Bennett," she said, her voice still shaking. "That's my daughter. You saved her life." Drew didn't know what to say. Liam came to stand beside him, silent, unsure. "Thank you," Celeste said, and this time she meant it like a vow. The parking lot was quieter now, though the tension still hovered like steam over sun-baked pavement. Drew stood a short distance away from the broken SUV, watching as Celeste knelt beside her daughter with a towel one of the staff had brought from inside. The little girl, Ava, was wrapped in it now, sipping from a water bottle and blinking in slow, exhausted confusion. The showroom crowd had begun to disperse, some returning to their desks, others ducking back into the air-conditioned silence where everything made sense again. But Drew lingered, his hands sticky with blood and sweat, his mind still racing. He didn't want to stay. He wasn't looking for praise or attention. His instinct, sharpened by years of keeping his head down, told him to take Liam by the hand and leave before this turned into something it wasn't. Yet something rooted him in place. Maybe it was the way Celeste kept glancing back at him. Maybe it was the way Liam looked up at him with wide, quiet eyes, as if he'd just watched his dad turn into someone larger than life. A few minutes later, Celeste stood up and approached. She had Ava in her arms, the little girl now calm but clinging tight. There were streaks of glass dust on Celeste's dress, and her heels clicked softly against the pavement. She stopped in front of Drew, her eyes searching his face. Her voice, when it came, was low and firm. "I need you to come inside with me," she said. Drew hesitated. "I wasn't trying to make a scene. I know," she interrupted gently. "Please." Liam looked up at him, uncertain. Drew nodded and squeezed his shoulder. "Come on, kiddo. We'll just talk for a minute." Inside, the air conditioning hit him again, but this time it didn't feel so hostile. Celeste led them past the reception desk, past the hallway lined with framed awards and photos, and into an office with a wide glass window overlooking the showroom floor. The furniture was elegant but functional, the desk neat, the walls painted in neutral tones that gave no hint of personal taste. It smelled faintly of lavender and new leather. She set Ava on the small couch in the corner, then turned to Drew. "Sit down, please," she said, motioning to one of the chairs. Drew hesitated, but finally lowered himself into the seat, Liam still close by. "I owe you an apology," Celeste began, her eyes steady. "First, for how you were treated earlier, and second, for what just happened outside. If you hadn't been there—" "You don't need to say anything," Drew replied. "She's safe. That's what matters." "I do need to say something," she said, her voice soft but edged with emotion. "That girl is my world. And I left her in that car because I took a phone call, stepped inside for 2 minutes, and didn't realize the door had auto-locked. She panicked. Tuve read stories like that. I never thought I'd be one." Drew looked down at his hands, red from the broken glass, small cuts already beginning to sting. "It only takes a few minutes," he said quietly. "That heat, it's like an oven." Celeste nodded, crossing her arms over her chest as if to hold herself together. "They were going to tow your van," she said suddenly. "After you left the first time, my staff didn't even ask if you were a customer, they assumed." Drew raised an eyebrow. "I was a customer, or trying to be." Celeste looked him in the eye. "Not anymore. You're my guest." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he stayed quiet. Liam had wandered toward the window, peering down at the rows of gleaming cars below. Ava was sitting up now, a small crayon and paper set in front of her, drawing with intense focus. It was as if the moment outside had melted away into something distant and hard to grasp. "I'm not used to being the one who needs help," Celeste said after a long pause. "I run a dealership. I chair a foundation. I'm supposed to have it together." Drew offered a tired smile. "Welcome to the club." She let out a soft laugh, and it broke the tension enough to breathe again. "Your son," she said, nodding toward Liam. "He watched everything. The way he looked at you, he thinks you're some kind of superhero." Drew's smile faded into something more reflective. "He's all I've got," he said simply. "Since his mom passed, it's just been the two of us." Celeste's eyes softened. "I'm sorry. That must be harder than most people realize." "It is," he said, "but it's also the best part of my life." They sat in silence for a beat. Outside the window, the same salesmen who'd mocked him earlier were now gathered in a tight circle, casting glances up toward the office and speaking in low tones. Celeste followed his gaze and sighed. "I need to deal with this," she said. "But before I do, may I ask your name?" "Drew Carter," he said, standing slowly and reaching to shake her hand. She took it with both of hers. "Thank you, Drew, for everything." He nodded. "Take care of her. She's got a strong heart." Celeste smiled. "She takes after her mother." They stepped out into the hallway together. A few of the staff looked away, pretending to be absorbed in screens or paperwork. Others gave Drew a different look, now not pity, not ridicule. Something closer to respect, or maybe awe. "Do you need a ride?" Celeste asked. He glanced at his van through the window. "She's not pretty, but she'll get us home. If she doesn't, call me," she said, and this time she handed him a small card. He took it, unsure whether it was politeness or something else. Liam tugged at his hand. "Daddy, can we get juice on the way home?" Drew ruffled his son's hair. "Yeah, kiddo, we earned it." As they walked back toward the exit, Drew passed Craig, the smirking salesman who had laughed hardest earlier. Craig opened his mouth as if to say something, but Drew didn't stop. He wasn't angry. He didn't even care anymore. The only thing that mattered was the little hand in his and the girl whose life he'd helped save. Outside, the heat hadn't lessened, but the world felt lighter somehow. Drew climbed into the van, started the engine, and listened as it wheezed but turned over. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw Liam watching him with quiet admiration. "Did you see her?" Liam asked as they pulled away. "Yeah," Drew said softly. "I saw her." He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't expect anything to come of today. But something had shifted, something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the broken window, or the exchanged glances, or the simple thank you. It was the way Celeste had looked at him, like he mattered, and that after everything was worth more than any car on that lot. Drew hadn't expected to hear from her again. After the heat of that moment faded and he'd wiped the blood from his hands, after the van wheezed its way home and Liam had fallen asleep with his head on Drew's arm during a cartoon, he had told himself that was it. A one-time act of decency, a close call that belonged to someone else's world. A rich woman with a second chance to hold her daughter because a stranger had stepped in. He hadn't done it to be noticed. He didn't want to be owed. So when the phone buzzed the next morning and he saw an unfamiliar number flash across the screen, he almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Something about the memory of that little girl's flushed face, her eyes darting in panic, and the sound of Celeste's voice trembling as she whispered, "Thank you," made him press the answer button. "Mr. Carter?" The voice was soft but clear. He recognized it instantly. "Speaking," he said, standing by the kitchen sink in a shirt with a rip under one sleeve. Liam was still asleep in the other room. "This is Celeste Bennett. From yesterday." He let the silence hang for a second, unsure what to say. It wasn't like he could forget her voice. "I remember. I hope this isn't too early. I wanted to speak to you before the day pulled me away. It's fine. Just me and a cup of burnt coffee right now." Celeste gave a faint laugh. "Would you be willing to meet me back at the dealership today? I'd like to talk. Nothing formal. I just think we left a few things unfinished." Drew paused. He could already hear the arguments in his head. The van needed a timing belt. Rent was due next week. He had a dozen errands that came with being a dad and none of the time. But instead of any of that, what came out was, "Sure, I can be there by 10. "Perfect," she said, and he heard her exhale like she'd been holding her breath. "Just come to the back entrance. I'll be in the service office." He stood in his kitchen for a long time after the call ended. The sunlight filtered through thin curtains and painted long lines on the floor. He looked down at his calloused hands, rubbed the fresh cuts healing across his knuckles, and wondered what this was. Gratitude? Curiosity? Guilt? At exactly 10, Drew parked the van in the shade behind the service bay. A younger mechanic with a clipboard and nervous eyes waved him toward the open garage door and pointed to a door labeled Manager. Inside, it smelled of coffee and grease, the way real garages always did. Celeste was already waiting. She wasn't in one of the expensive dresses this time. She wore jeans, a white button-up shirt rolled at the sleeves, and a watch with no gemstones. Her hair was down. She looked like someone who had dropped the role of dealership owner and was trying, instead, to be a person. "Thanks for coming," she said, motioning for him to sit across from her at the desk. Drew took a seat. "Not every day I get summoned by the boss." "I'm not summoning you," she replied. "I invited you." He nodded, still wary. "I didn't sleep much last night," Celeste said. "I kept thinking about everything, about how easily that moment could have ended another way, about how many people walked by the car and did nothing, and about how someone who'd just been humiliated stepped up without thinking. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. That's part of why it means something." They sat in a quiet pause, not exactly comfortable, but not strained either. There was something familiar about her now, stripped of gloss and polish, something human. "I read the intake report this morning," she said. "We keep logs of everyone who steps onto the lot, even if the staff pretends otherwise. Your name, what you were looking for, the van." Drew said nothing. "I want to be direct," she went on. "Your van won't last much longer. You know that. You have a child, and you're doing everything yourself. You didn't deserve to be treated like garbage in my showroom. That's not your fault." "Yes, it is. They work for me. That makes it my responsibility." He looked at her then, really looked. Her eyes weren't just tired, they were heavy with something else. Regret, maybe, or guilt, Or maybe she was just exhausted from carrying everything at once. He knew that feeling too well. "I'd like to do something," she said. "I want to give you a vehicle. Not a loan, not a lease, just a car. Something safe, reliable, big enough for you and your son." Drew blinked. He waited for the catch, the condition, the hidden string. "You don't owe me anything. That's not the point. You're running a business. I'm also raising a daughter, and yesterday, a stranger gave her back to me." Drew leaned back in the chair, the words sticking in his throat. He couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him anything without asking for something in return. Since Anna died, he'd been the one giving, surviving, fixing things with duct tape and hope. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes." He rubbed the back of his neck. "This isn't pity?" "No," she said quietly. "It's honor." She stood and walked to a file cabinet, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a set of keys attached to a simple black fob. She walked back and placed them on the desk between them. "It's not top of the line," she said, "but it's solid, and it's yours. No payments, no gimmicks, just the key." He stared at it. That small black plastic piece, so ordinary, yet it looked like a symbol, a second chance. Behind him, a mechanic passed through the hallway. Drew heard the clinking of tools, the hum of equipment, life moving as usual around them. And here he sat, in a dealership office, being offered something he never thought he'd have without debt or compromise. He took the key slowly, holding it in his palm. He nodded once. "Thank you," he said. Celeste smiled, but there was something in it that hinted at more than relief. Maybe a quiet joy, maybe pride, or maybe it was simply the satisfaction of doing what she knew in her heart was right. "You saved my daughter," she said. "This is the least I can do." They both stood at the same time. He offered his hand again, and this time, when she took it, her grip lingered a moment longer than it needed to. Their eyes met, not awkwardly, not with hesitation, but with a thread of understanding, thin but strong, beginning to weave between them. As Drew walked out to the back lot with the keys in hand, the morning sun caught the hood of a silver SUV parked near the service bay. He didn't know what kind it was. He didn't care. What he knew was that his son would be safe in it, that maybe today he could breathe easier. He glanced back once through the glass door. Celeste stood watching him, arms crossed, a thoughtful expression on her face. He nodded again, and she nodded back. Drew walked up to the silver SUV with a mixture of awe and disbelief still working its way through him. The vehicle sparkled beneath the sun, clean and unassuming, not flashy like the others on the lot. But it stood there with a quiet strength, and something about it matched the woman who had handed him the keys. He approached slowly, still unsure whether this was really happening, still half expecting someone to call out and stop him. The door opened with a soft click, and when he slid behind the wheel, the scent of new leather greeted him like a breath of fresh air. The dashboard glowed with life. Everything was quiet, smooth, balanced. He sat there for a long moment, his fingers wrapped around the steering wheel, listening to the silence. Liam's voice broke it. "Whoa, Dad, this is like a spaceship." Drew looked over to see his son standing by the passenger side, eyes wide and glowing with excitement. "Go on, hop in," Drew said, reaching across to push the door open. Liam scrambled into the seat with a kind of joy Drew hadn't seen in a while. His small hands ran over the door panel, the buttons, the seatbelt buckle. It was all magic to him, and for a moment, Drew let himself enjoy the look on his boy's face. "You like it?" he asked. "I love it," Liam whispered. "It smells better than the couch." Drew laughed, the sound rough but warm. He reached over and ruffled his son's hair. "Don't tell the couch that." They drove home slowly. Drew kept both hands on the wheel and his eyes alert, not out of nervousness, but because he wanted to savor it. Every stoplight felt like a confirmation that yes, this was real. The engine hummed smoothly beneath his feet, and every bump in the road felt like it mattered less. He saw people glance at him now, not with judgment or curiosity, but just as another man in another car. Normal. Invisible in the best way. When they reached their small apartment complex, Drew parked the SUV and turned off the engine. Liam didn't move. "Do we have to go inside?" he asked. "Yeah, buddy. Just for a bit." Liam looked back at the car as he stepped out. "Can we drive it again later?" "Definitely." Drew reached into the glove box and placed the registration Celeste had handed him beside the manual. The papers had been filled out already. Title transferred. No lien. No tricks. Her name was scribbled in neat print across the bottom line, with a note in the margin that simply said, "No repayment needed. Just pay it forward." Inside their apartment, Drew dropped onto the couch with a groan and let his head fall back against the cushion. Liam was already digging into a box of cereal, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the TV. For a while, Drew just listened to the sounds of home, the quiet crunching, the soft chatter from the cartoon, the hum of the refrigerator. He should have been content. He should have felt like everything was right. But he didn't. Something about the look in Celeste's eyes when she handed him the keys still clung to him. There was gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something unresolved. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, a soft buzz from Drew's phone pulled him from a short nap. He blinked at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number. A photo loaded first a candid shot of Ava drawing at a table, her curls falling over her forehead as she leaned in close to the paper. Below it, the message read, "She drew a picture of you. Said you had superhero eyes. Thought you'd want to see it." Drew smiled without meaning to. He stared at the image longer than he needed to. Then he typed back, "Tell her I think she's got a superhero heart." The reply came a minute later. "Are you free this weekend? There's a charity event for families in the park. Ava would love to see Liam again. I'd like to thank you properly with fewer people watching." Drew hesitated. He hadn't done anything for thanks, but something about the invitation felt less like an obligation and more like an opening, a chance to see someone as they really were, outside of a glass office and showroom lights. "We'll be there," he wrote back. Saturday came with clear skies and the scent of summer in the air. The park was alive with laughter and music, balloons tied to tents and kids darting between booths with painted faces. Drew spotted Celeste before she saw him, crouched beside a table filled with art supplies, helping Ava open a bottle of glitter glue. She wore a denim jacket and sneakers this time, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked relaxed, happy, real. When Ava saw Liam, she ran to him without hesitation, grabbing his hand and dragging him toward the face-painting booth. Celeste stood as Drew approached. Her smile was soft, but her eyes searched his face as if to make sure he hadn't changed since the dealership. "You came," she said. "You invited me." She folded her arms lightly. "Still, I didn't know if you would. I figured I owed it to Liam. And maybe to you." She nodded. "We're hosting this for a local family shelter. We try to make it fun for the kids, even if the adults are barely holding it together." Drew looked around at the families scattered across the grass. They look happy. That counts for something. They started walking together, not with purpose, but with ease. Every now and then, Celeste waved to someone or stopped to answer a quick question, but she kept returning to his side. She told him about the foundation she helped run, about how the dealership funded community work when it could, about the pushback she got from shareholders who saw it as a distraction. "You don't strike me as someone who backs down," Drew said. "I used to." She stopped near the lemonade stand, her voice quiet. "Before the divorce, I spent a lot of time trying to be the version of myself someone else wanted. Polished, predictable, manageable. It wore me out. And now?" She met his eyes. "Now I just want to raise my daughter well and sleep at night." Drew considered that. "Sounds like a decent plan." They stood there for a while, watching the kids laugh. Liam was now sporting a crooked blue star on his cheek. Ava had glitter on her nose and was showing off her rainbow nails to a group of admiring girls. "She talks about you," Celeste said suddenly. "Keeps asking if you're going to be in her next dream." He smiled, but said nothing. "I think she feels safe around you," she added. "That means a lot. I just did what anyone should have done." "Maybe," she said, "but you were the one who did it." They kept walking, drifting between booths and small conversations until the sun began to dip and families started packing up. The kids were still buzzing with energy, but even they slowed down as dusk settled. Before they left, Celeste handed Drew a small envelope. He opened it later, after Liam had fallen asleep in the back seat on the drive home. Inside was a simple card with Ava's drawing. 2 stick figures, a boy and a girl holding hands, a tall man with big hands and a blue cape, and a line in crayons scrawled across the top. "Thank you for being brave." Drew didn't cry, but he held the card a little longer than necessary, and for the first time in years, he wondered if life was opening a door he didn't have to knock on. Maybe he was already being welcomed in. The invitation had come casually. Celeste had mentioned it in passing, almost as an afterthought, as they stood packing up juice boxes and snack wrappers near the park exit, a community picnic by the lake. Nothing formal. Just a way to let the kids enjoy one more summer Saturday before school crept closer and responsibilities took over again. Drew hadn't answered right away. He hadn't known what to say. Part of him still clung to the idea that what had passed between them, the dealership, the rescue, the SUV, the laughter in the park, was just a passing connection, a few threads of warmth in an otherwise hard stretch of road. But the look in her eyes when she asked, the way she said his name with a softness he hadn't heard in years, made it difficult to shrug off. So when Saturday came and Liam was already up and dressed in swim trunks and a sun hat before Drew even got out of bed, he figured his answer had already been decided for him. The lake was about 30 minutes outside the city. The roads curved gently, flanked by pine and oak, and Drew found himself breathing easier with each passing mile. The SUV glided smoothly through the landscape. Liam sat in the back seat, humming to himself, clutching a beach ball like it was treasure. Drew's own nerves, thin and scattered, settled somewhere around his chest. They arrived to find picnic tables lined with gingham cloths, coolers nestled in shade, and children darting across the grassy clearing toward the water. A few adults stood grilling hot dogs, while others sorted folding chairs and towels near the shore. It wasn't a big crowd, just enough to make the place feel alive without overwhelming the quiet. Celeste was already there, her long cardigan swaying gently in the breeze. She waved when she saw them, her face lighting up as Ava broke away from her side and ran toward Liam, arms outstretched. The kids collided in a joyful tangle and took off running together without hesitation. "Hey," Celeste said when Drew reached her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She wore a light dress, comfortable sandals, and a wide-brimmed hat that somehow made her look younger than the poised woman he'd met that first day. "Hey," he replied, a little awkwardly. "Beautiful spot. I used to come here when I was a kid," she said, "before everything became boardrooms and quarterly reviews. You didn't seem like the boardroom type today. That's the goal." They stood side by side for a moment, watching the kids chase each other toward the water, Ava squealing with laughter while Liam darted just ahead. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Celeste admitted. "Me neither," Drew said. "But you did." He nodded. "I figured if Liam was excited enough to pack snacks by 6:30, I didn't have much of a choice." She laughed. It was genuine and relaxed, not the kind of polished amusement that came with polite conversation. Drew felt it settle into his chest like something warm and steady. They walked together toward the tables, where a group of volunteers passed out lemonade and fruit. People greeted Celeste with easy smiles, some shaking her hand, others exchanging inside jokes. She belonged here, not just as a host or a figurehead, but as a real part of the community. It surprised Drew more than he cared to admit. "You're good at this," he said as she handed him a paper plate and napkin. "At what?" "This. People. Events. Making things feel like they matter." She shrugged and looked out at the lake. "It took me a long time to realize I didn't have to be someone else to do that." Drew took a slow sip of lemonade, the tartness catching him just right. Wish I'd figured that out sooner. They spent the next hour easing into the rhythm of the day. The kids played games near the water, splashing and shrieking, their laughter rising above the gentle lapping of waves. Celeste took photos for the local charity's website. Drew helped move folding tables and chase down a rogue soccer ball. It felt natural, unforced. There were no sideways glances, no awkward introductions. Just the kind of peace that rarely visited his life. Later, they sat near the water's edge, their shoes kicked off and toes buried in warm sand. The sun hovered above the trees, casting a golden glow that made everything feel soft and close. "I've been thinking about that day," Celeste said quietly, breaking the lull. Drew turned to look at her. "The day you broke the window." He waited. "I wasn't just distracted, I was overwhelmed. I'd just gotten off a call with my ex-husband. He was threatening to take me back to court over custody." Drew didn't speak, but his expression shifted surprised, then pained. "I was panicking," she continued. "And I made a mistake, a big one. I kept replaying it in my head afterward, wondering how close I came to losing her." "You didn't," he said softly. "But I could have, if you hadn't been there." "I was," Drew said. "That's what matters." She looked at him then, her eyes rimmed with something vulnerable. "You could have just kept walking. Nobody would have blamed you." "Maybe," he said, "but I would have blamed myself." She smiled faintly. "That's what I mean. There's something about you, the way you carry everything without making people feel it." Drew's mouth twitched into something resembling a smile. "It's a lot of duct tape and deep breaths." She laughed again, leaning slightly toward him. "I don't know if you see it, but you've got this quiet strength, like you're the kind of man who doesn't need to say a lot to mean everything." Drew looked out across the water. The wind stirred gently through the trees. In the distance, Liam and Ava sat in the sand building a lopsided castle. "I used to be more open," he said finally. "But after Anna passed, I just shut the world out, one day at a time. Then it became a habit, survival mostly." Celeste reached out, her fingers brushing against his, not quite holding, just close enough to feel the contact. "I'm not trying to fix you," she said. "I just like having you around." He looked down at her hand, then back up to her eyes. "I like being around." The words weren't romantic, they weren't grand, but they meant more than anything he'd said in a long time. They sat like that as the sun dipped lower and the sky turned to copper. The air cooled, the lake shimmered, and the kids began to slow their pace, tired from the long day of running and laughing. When it was time to leave, neither Drew nor Celeste said much more. They packed up their things, gathered the kids, and walked to the cars. But before they parted ways, she paused beside him. "You know," she said, brushing sand from her dress, "this wasn't just for the kids." "I figured," he said. She stepped in close, kissed his cheek lightly, and whispered, "Next time, let me bring the snacks." Then she walked to her car, hand in Ava's, leaving Drew standing by the silver SUV with a smile he couldn't hold back. He watched her drive away, the taillights fading into the distance. He didn't know where this was going, but for the first time in a long time, he wanted to find out. The cemetery was quiet, as it always was in the early hours of the morning. Long shadows stretched across the dewy grass, and the air still held the coolness of the night before. Drew walked slowly between the rows, a paper coffee cup in one hand and a single wildflower in the other. His boots left faint imprints in the dirt as he stepped toward the familiar headstone, its surface smooth and gray, weathered just slightly at the corners from wind and rain. He stopped a few feet away, looked down, and took a slow breath. The words carved into the stone were simple. Anna Carter, beloved wife and mother. 1987, 2017. Drew crouched, set the coffee down, and placed the flower beside the base of the marker. For a few moments, he said nothing. There wasn't much left to say, and yet every time he visited, the silence between them filled with all the things he hadn't spoken aloud. Liam lost a tooth this week, he said finally. Bottom left. He kept checking the mirror every 10 minutes like something magical was going to happen. He smiled softly to himself, then sighed. I think you'd be proud of him. He's kind, brave, keeps me grounded. His fingers traced the edge of the stone. I met someone. He waited, as if listening for a response. The wind stirred lightly through the trees nearby, rustling the leaves in gentle agreement. I wasn't looking for it. It just happened. She's different, strong. Scared too, I think, but she hides it well. Reminds me of you sometimes. The way you used to carry everything like it weighed nothing. He sat down on the grass, leaning against the base of the stone, the coffee growing cold beside him. I'm not rushing anything, he said. But when I'm around her, things feel less heavy, like maybe there's still space in my life for something good. He let the words settle, let the quiet wrap around him like a blanket. Coming here still hurt, but it didn't ache in the same way anymore. It wasn't raw. It wasn't angry. It just was. He stood slowly, brushing the grass from his jeans. I'll come back soon. He walked away without looking back. The sun had climbed higher by the time he reached the SUV. Liam would be waking up soon, and there were errands to run before the day slipped through his fingers. Back in town, Celeste sat behind her desk at the dealership, staring at a message on her phone. Her lawyer had forwarded an email that morning, one that made her stomach twist with frustration. Brandon, her ex-husband, was pushing for a formal review of their custody agreement. He claimed Ava had been placed in an unsafe situation, that she had been neglected. He wanted more time with her. Or worse, full custody. Celeste placed the phone face down on the desk and pressed her hands against her temples. She hadn't responded yet. She knew if she called, it would turn into an argument. Brandon had always been good at throwing blame while keeping his voice calm enough to sound rational on paper, and he knew how to twist facts into narratives. It was what had made him dangerous, even when they were married. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. One of the floor managers stepped in with a clipboard, eyes nervous. There's a situation out front, he said. Might be nothing, but your ex is here. Celeste's heart sank. She stood, walked out of the office, and spotted Brandon by the entrance, hands in the pockets of his designer slacks, sunglasses perched on his head. He looked perfectly at ease, as if strolling through the dealership was a casual stop on his morning agenda. What are you doing here? She asked when she reached him. I figured we could talk, he said, voice smooth. Face to face. This isn't the place. I disagree, he said, glancing around. It's the perfect place. You're always playing the professional, the strong mother, the pillar of the community. I thought it might be fun to see how sturdy that pillar really is. She narrowed her eyes. You've made your position clear. I'm just concerned for Ava, he said, his tone oozing false sincerity. That whole incident last week, it raised some questions. She's safe. She was never in danger for more than a few minutes, and she's never questioned whether I care about her. She shouldn't have been in that situation to begin with. You never cared about schedules or pickups when we were married. Don't pretend you're suddenly father of the year. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You know the board hears about these things, don't you? Rumors float. Questions get asked. What happens to your position here if they start to doubt your judgment? Celeste held her ground. They won't. He raised a brow. Confident? Even with your new friend hanging around? Celeste didn't respond. Word gets out, Brandon continued. Guy rolls up in a rust bucket. Now he's in a company car. People talk. They wonder what he's really doing here, How much of this is about gratitude and how much is about something else? She stepped forward, voice low. Drew is a good man, the kind you wouldn't recognize if he stood in front of you. Brandon chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe you're just lonely. If you come here again without warning, I'll file for a protective order, she said. Brandon tilted his head, gave a small, mocking bow, and walked out. That evening, Drew stopped by the dealership after closing hours. He hadn't planned to, but something in his gut told him to check in. When he arrived, he found Celeste sitting alone in the empty showroom, the lights dimmed, her posture tired but still upright. Hey, he said gently. You look like you've been through a day and a half. She smiled, without lifting her head. It's been a long one. He sat beside her. Want to talk about it? She hesitated, then nodded. Brandon showed up, accused me of being careless, said he was going to the board, said I shouldn't trust you. Drew didn't react at first. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You want me to disappear? I will. No, she said immediately, turning to face him. That's the last thing I want. Then what do you need? Celeste looked at him, really looked. I need you to not doubt yourself, or us. Whatever this is, I've spent too many years being careful. I don't want to live like that anymore. He nodded slowly. I'm here. For you, for Ava, for Liam. She reached for his hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Their fingers laced together without effort. I don't know where this goes, she whispered. We'll find out, Drew said. Together. And for the first time that day, her shoulders relaxed. The fear didn't vanish, but it shrank into something smaller, something bearable. Outside the showroom, the last light of the day faded, and the dealership stood quiet against the backdrop of a world still spinning. Inside, two people sat side by side, hands intertwined, anchoring each other in the growing dark. The sun sat high above the lake again, this time bathing the shoreline in softer gold as clouds drifted lazily across the sky. It had been a long week for both Drew and Celeste, but the warmth of the weekend brought a needed change of pace. Ava and Liam were already ankle-deep in the water, shrieking with laughter as they tossed tiny handfuls of mud and splashed each other without concern for their soaked shorts or messy hair. Celeste sat on a picnic blanket with her sandals kicked off, her toes buried in the sand, while Drew returned from the small food stand, carrying 2 lemonades and a plate of warm pretzels dusted in salt. They had ketchup, he said, handing her the plate with a grin, which I find deeply wrong, but the lady insisted. Celeste took the pretzel with a grateful nod and wiped her hands on her jeans. You've clearly never had a daughter obsessed with dipping things in everything. Ava would eat pancakes with mustard if I let her. Liam's been known to dip grapes in ranch dressing, Drew replied. I've stopped asking questions. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that wasn't loud or exaggerated, but easy and real. The kind that came when two people had spent enough time together to know when to share silence and when to fill it. After a moment, Drew leaned back on his elbows and let out a slow breath. You know, I never imagined my life would feel this normal again. Celeste tilted her head. Normal's not so bad. I used to think it was boring. Routine. Wake up, go to work, pay the bills, fall asleep, do it again. But after everything that's happened, I'd trade 1,000 chaotic days for one like this. Celeste didn't answer right away. She looked out at the kids, her eyes lingering on Ava's face as she beamed at Liam, her cheeks flushed with joy. I know what you mean. The moment held, gentle and unforced, until Drew turned to her with a more serious expression. Can I ask you something? Of course. That kiss last weekend, he said. Was that spur of the moment or something you'd been thinking about? She didn't look away. Both. Drew nodded slowly. I've been thinking about it too. A lot. So have I, she said. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, letting his fingers linger at her jaw. Her skin was warm from the sun. She leaned into the touch without hesitation. "I haven't done this in a long time," Drew said. "Me neither." They leaned toward each other at the same time, and when their lips met, it was softer than either of them expected. No rush, no performance. Just the quiet recognition that they had reached a place where affection no longer needed to be held back. The kiss deepened for a moment before they slowly parted, their foreheads resting together, both of them smiling. "I'm glad you came to the dealership that day," Celeste whispered. "I almost didn't. I'm glad you did." They sat in the quiet warmth of the moment until a shout from the water snapped them back. "Dad, look what we built!" Liam was waving wildly, motioning toward a lopsided sandcastle with Ava kneeling beside it. Drew stood and offered a hand to Celeste, helping her up as they made their way toward the water. As the kids showed off their creation complete with seashells and 2 stick-figure flags, Drew felt something shift inside him. Not something new, but something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. A calm certainty that life could be good again. That night, after returning home and getting Liam to bed, Drew sat on the back steps of the apartment building. The night was cool and quiet, the kind of stillness that let your thoughts drift without interruption. He scrolled through his messages and saw one from Celeste. "You made today feel like a beginning. Thank you." He stared at the words for a while, thumbs hovering over the screen. Before he could respond, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. He answered. "Hello? Mr. Carter. This is Amanda Reynolds from Child Protective Services. I'm reaching out regarding an inquiry that's been opened involving Miss Celeste Bennett and her daughter Ava." Drew sat up straighter, heart kicking into a faster rhythm. "What kind of inquiry?" "I can't share the details just yet, but I'd like to set up a time to speak with you in person. We've received a statement from a concerned party alleging neglect, referencing an incident where Ava was left unattended in a locked vehicle." His blood ran cold. "That was a misunderstanding. She wasn't." "I understand," Amanda said gently. "We're simply doing our due diligence. It's standard procedure." He agreed to meet her the following afternoon and hung up slowly, the weight of the call settling heavily on his chest. He sat in the dark for a long time, the air colder now than it had been minutes before. The next morning he drove to Celeste's house. She opened the door in a long robe, her hair in loose curls, and immediately saw the tension in his face. "What happened?" she asked, her voice already tight. "They're investigating you," Drew said. "Child Protective Services called me last night." She went still, one hand pressed lightly against the door frame. "They're what?" "They said they got a report about Ava being left in the car. They didn't say who made it, but I think we both know." "Brandon," she said, the name bitter on her tongue. "He's trying to scare me into giving up custody." Drew stepped inside. "What do you need me to do?" "I don't know." She rubbed her forehead, pacing the living room. "If they find any reason to believe she's not safe here, I could lose time with her. Even a temporary suspension, he'll use that in court. I'll tell them exactly what happened, that you stepped inside for 2 minutes, that I was the one who found her, that you were there before anything serious could happen." Celeste turned to him, her eyes shining. "Do you think they'll believe us?" "I think they'll believe the truth, and I'll make sure they hear it." She sat on the couch, burying her face in her hands. Drew sat beside her, placing a hand on her back. "We'll get through this." She looked up at him. "You don't have to be in the middle of it." "I already am," he said, "and I'm not walking away." Her face broke into something halfway between relief and fear, but she nodded, leaning into his shoulder. "I'm scared, Drew. I know, but you're not alone." As the morning sun filtered through the windows and the house remained quiet around them, Drew held her tightly, letting her know with every breath that whatever came next, he was staying. The day of the interview with Child Protective Services arrived sooner than either of them wanted. Drew arrived at the agency office 10 minutes early, dressed in the only button-up shirt he owned that wasn't stained with oil or frayed at the collar. He'd shaved that morning and combed his hair, Small efforts that felt suddenly heavy as he sat in the waiting room, the clock ticking louder than it should have. The woman who greeted him introduced herself again as Amanda Reynolds. She led him into a private room with beige walls and a table that looked like it had been used for everything from paperwork to interrogation. Her voice was calm and patient, and her posture didn't carry suspicion-only protocol. Still, Drew could feel the pressure coil in his chest as he sat across from her and folded his hands on the table. "We're just trying to gather a complete picture," she said gently. "You were present during the incident at the dealership involving Ava Bennett." "I was," Drew said. "I was the one who got her out of the car. Can you walk me through it, in your own words?" Drew took a breath, nodded, and told her everything. How he had just left the dealership with his son, how he'd heard the faint sound of knocking, how he saw Ava trapped in the car, her face flushed, how he broke the window without thinking. He told her how Celeste came running out moments later, how she took her daughter into her arms, shaking, sobbing. "I never saw any sign of neglect," he said. "Celeste was inside the dealership for what, maybe 2 minutes? Ava must have bumped the auto lock. She didn't mean to leave her alone." Amanda took notes as he spoke, only interrupting once to clarify a time frame. When he finished, she set her pen down. "And in your interactions with Ms. Bennett since then, have you observed anything that would suggest Ava is in danger or not being properly cared for?" "Not once," Drew said firmly. "She's a wonderful mom. She's attentive, patient, loving. That little girl worships her." Amanda nodded and closed her notepad. "I appreciate your time. We've spoken with a few others, including staff from the dealership. I can't make promises, but I think things will resolve quickly." Drew stood, thanked her, and left with his pulse still tight but his jaw set with purpose. As he stepped out into the parking lot, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Celeste. "Board meeting moved up. They want to talk about public image. Wish me luck." He tapped out a quick response. "You don't need luck. You've got truth." But even as he hit send, he couldn't help feeling a rush of dread. Across town, Celeste sat in a conference room surrounded by 3 board members who wore polite expressions and stiff suits. Her assistant had offered to join, but she had declined. She didn't want anyone else in the crossfire. "We wanted to speak with you today," one of them, a man named Wallace, began, "because of concerns we've received from both within the company and from the community." Celeste folded her hands in her lap and waited. "The incident with your daughter has raised questions, as has your recent involvement with an individual some feel may be leveraging our brand for personal gain." She smiled coldly. "You're talking about Drew Carter, the man who saved my daughter's life." Wallace cleared his throat. "We understand your personal gratitude, but gifting him a vehicle." "I didn't gift him anything. I made a decision as owner of this company to thank someone who took action when no one else did." Another board member, a woman with steel-gray hair, spoke next. "But perception matters, Celeste. He's now working here part-time. There are whispers of favoritism. Do you know how many volunteer hours he's already logged for our outreach events? Do you know he taught one of our junior techs how to rebuild a carburetor last week, using nothing but a smile and patience?" They didn't respond. "You're all worried about image," Celeste said, standing now. "But let me tell you something. Our customers, our community, they respect authenticity. They want to see leaders who do more than sign checks and shake hands. They want to see people who care." Wallace shifted in his seat. "We just need to make sure this doesn't spiral into something we can't manage." Celeste placed both hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. "You want to manage me? Then remember why I'm here. I built this dealership into one of the top-performing branches in the region. I've launched 3 community partnerships and turned customer retention around by 27% in 2 years. If any of you think I'm putting that at risk by thanking someone who acted with decency and courage, then maybe it's your judgment that needs review." The room fell quiet. Finally, the gray-haired woman spoke again. "We'll hold off on any formal action until CPS concludes their investigation. In the meantime, We ask that you refrain from further public interactions that might draw attention." Celeste gave a small nod. Understood. But she didn't leave the room defeated. She left with her shoulders back and her spine straight, her mind already turning over her next move. That evening, Drew met her at her house. She opened the door before he could knock. Her expression was tired, but her eyes were still sharp. "I talked to CPS," he said. "I told them everything." She pulled him inside and wrapped her arms around him. The hug was tight, long, desperate in a way that neither of them spoke aloud. "I'm so tired of fighting," she whispered. "Then stop doing it alone," he said. "You've got me now." They sat on the couch, the kids asleep upstairs, and for the first time in days, the house felt still. "You know what the board said today?" she asked. "They told me to stay quiet, to stop being seen with you." Drew didn't flinch. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to keep showing up," she said. "With you, without shame." A smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "You sure you want that mess?" "I think the mess is what makes it real." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. He held her tightly. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I know," she whispered, "and that's what scares me, because I might actually let you stay." They didn't speak much after that. The clock ticked softly in the background. A storm was starting somewhere outside, the wind brushing against the windows, but inside the living room, something had settled. Not resolution, not yet, but resilience. And it would be enough. 1 year later, the dealership buzzed with a different kind of energy. The floors gleamed under the morning light, the showroom full of families walking between SUVs and sedans. There was music playing, soft and upbeat. Tables were set up along the side of the lot with lemonade, cookies, and pamphlets about community programs. Children played with balloon animals near the office windows while a group of teens worked at a booth offering free car seat inspections. It was Family and Community Car Day, and this time, the idea had not come from the boardroom, but from Drew Carter. He stood near the garage bay doors in a short-sleeved button-up and clean jeans, clipboard in hand, laughing as one of the junior techs tried to convince a 10-year-old that, yes, the engine could make that sound on purpose. His beard was trimmed, his eyes rested, and there was something different in the way he moved now. It wasn't that he had changed who he was. It was that he had finally stepped into the space where he could be all of himself father, mentor, partner, and stand comfortably in it. "Drew," called a voice from across the lot. He turned to see one of the salesmen approaching, the same man who had laughed at him the first day he walked onto the property. But this time, there was no trace of mockery. Only a clipboard held out with an apologetic smile. "Need your sign-off on the raffle entries," the man said. "We've got over 200 names already." Drew glanced at the sheet, nodded, and scribbled his initials at the bottom. "Good turnout." "Biggest one yet," the man replied. "Thanks to you." Drew gave a modest nod and turned back toward the main tent. He still wasn't used to being praised. That part came slowly. But he was learning to take it, not as a reward, but as proof that effort could ripple outward, even when you didn't ask for it to. Inside the main building, Celeste moved through the crowd with her usual calm focus, shaking hands with local officials, greeting parents, checking in with vendors. Her dress was a soft shade of blue that caught the light when she walked, and her heels clicked against the polished tile in a rhythm that somehow soothed rather than intimidated. Ava clung to her hand for part of the morning, before running off to paint a paper car with Liam and a group of kids from the nearby shelter. Celeste had started partnering with the shelter 3 months ago, offering free car maintenance, workshops, and apprenticeships to young adults aging out of the system. The first class of trainees had graduated just last week. Drew had led the instruction. Celeste had written every single one of them a reference letter herself. By noon, the sun cast long lines across the lot. Drew stood under a canopy, helping set up the final demo of the day, when Celeste appeared beside him, brushing a bit of flour from her dress evidence of her earlier battle with the cookie station. Want to sneak away for 5 minutes? She asked. He grinned. I thought you'd never ask. They slipped around the side of the building, past the loading dock, to the little staff garden Drew had built during his first official week on payroll. It was nothing fancy, just a few planters, a bench, some lavender and mint butt. It smelled good and stayed quiet, even when the rest of the lot pulsed with activity. Celeste sat on the bench and leaned back, eyes closed, taking in the hush of the space. You know, she said softly, this morning one of the board members pulled me aside, told me the event's been nominated for a regional award, Best Community Outreach in the automotive sector. Drew laughed. Sounds important. It is, but not for the reasons they think. It means everything we've done here, the new programs, the way we treat customers, the employees we gave second chances, toits being noticed, not just tolerated. He sat beside her. You earned that. We earned it, she said. Together. They were quiet for a long time, not because there was nothing to say, but because silence between them had become something safe, something shared. Finally, Celeste reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet box. Drew looked at it, startled. What's that? She handed it to him. Open it. He did. Inside was a brass key on a slim leather chain. On the tag it said, Office 1B, Community Liaison. I thought I already had an office, he said, confused. You do, but this one's yours, fully yours, title and everything. You're not just running workshops anymore, you're leading the entire outreach wing. Training, youth programs, volunteer coordination, public advocacy. He stared at the key. You've earned it, she said. All of it. He looked up at her, the box still open in his hands. I never thought I'd be someone people looked to, trusted. You were always that person, she said. You just didn't have the right space to show it. Drew closed the box and leaned forward, resting his forehead gently against hers. I love you, she smiled. I know, and I love you too. They kissed once, quietly, the kind of kiss that didn't ask anything, didn't announce anything, just confirmed what they already knew. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of handshakes and laughter, music and raffle tickets. At one point, Drew hoisted Liam onto his shoulders, while Ava clung to Celeste's arm and squealed about the winning Prizia shiny pink scooter that would now have to be split between two best friends who had long since forgotten the day they met. As the sun dipped lower and the crowd thinned, Celeste gathered the staff under the big tent for one last toast. She stood at the center, her glass of lemonade raised, and called Drew up beside her. This dealership used to be just a business, she said. Now it's something else, something rooted in people, in redemption, in second chances. She turned to Drew and handed him the microphone. He blinked, then stepped forward, clearing his throat. I came here a year ago, hoping to trade in a van that barely started, he said. I was laughed at, brushed aside. I was ready to walk away. He paused, eyes moving across the gathered faces. But then I saw a little girl in trouble, and everything changed. He glanced at Ava, then at Liam, then at Celeste. I didn't rescue anyone to get something out of it. I did it because it was the right thing to do. What I didn't know was how many people would rescue me in return. There was a quiet hush in the tent, the kind of stillness that only came when people were truly listening. I don't know what tomorrow holds, Drew finished, but I know who I'll be walking through it with, and I think that's all any of us really want to know. We're not doing this alone. Applause followed, warm and real. Drew stepped back beside Celeste. She reached for his hand and held it high, like they had just won something together. And maybe they had. As evening fell and the last guests drifted away, Drew and Celeste stood at the edge of the lot, watching Liam and Ava chase each other between the empty parking spots. The air had cooled, and the lights above the lot flickered on one by one. Do you remember the first time you came here? Celeste asked. I remember your sales guys laughing at me. And now? He slipped his arm around her, Now they work for me." She laughed. "You've come a long way, Drew Carter. So have you, Celeste Bennett." They stood in the quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled, and watched their kids run together under the soft glow of the dealership lights. It wasn't just about love or work or even redemption anymore. It was about building something real. Together. The autumn wind rolled softly across the lot, sweeping leaves into the corners where the pavement met the curb. Inside the dealership, balloons swayed gently from the tops of display cars, and the sound of soft music echoed from a speaker near the service desk. It was quieter now than it had been during the big family day a few weeks earlier, but the energy still pulsed, steady and proud, like the heartbeat of something that had finally found its rhythm. Drew stood in the same showroom where, a year earlier, he'd been humiliated. He looked different now. The lines in his face hadn't vanished, but they'd softened. He held himself upright, not with tension or defense, but with quiet confidence. He wore a navy shirt tucked neatly into a pair of clean work jeans, a name tag on his chest that read, Drew Carter, Community Director. He spoke with a father and his teenage daughter about internship opportunities, describing the program with the kind of conviction that only comes from someone who's lived the story behind the pitch. Celeste watched him from her office, the door open as always. Her desk was filled with thank you cards from families, printouts from social media posts about the dealership's transformation, and notes from board members who had slowly, and not without resistance, come around to respect her decisions. One of the photos on her desk showed her standing beside Drew, both of them laughing, Liam and Ava peeking from behind them with ice cream-stained grins. She stepped out into the showroom just as Drew was finishing up the conversation. The father thanked him, shook his hand, and turned to his daughter with a smile. "This is the kind of place I want you to learn from," he said, and the two of them walked toward the service bay together. "You have a fan club," Celeste teased as she joined him. "I've got good material," he said, "and I had a great teacher." She laughed and slipped her arm around his waist. He leaned down and kissed her temple, right there in front of everyone. No one blinked, no one whispered. The days of questioning why he was there, or what he wanted, had long since passed. Now he was simply part of the place. He belonged. Later that afternoon, they closed early for a staff appreciation gathering in the break room. It wasn't fancy, just pizza, soda, and some store-bought cupcakes with blue and silver icing, but it mattered. People lingered over their slices, swapped jokes, and shared updates about their families. One of the younger techs stood up at the back and raised his soda can. "To Drew," he said, "for giving me a shot when I didn't think I'd be good at anything except messing up." Everyone laughed, including Drew, who raised his can in return. "To second chances," he replied, "and to not blowing them." The laughter deepened, and the clinking of soda cans followed. It was a simple moment, but Drew would remember it. These were people who, a year ago, wouldn't have noticed him. Now, they trusted him, looked to him, called him boss, mentor, and friend. As the evening sun dipped low, casting long golden beams through the windows, Celeste pulled Drew aside. She held a small, square envelope in her hand. "What's this?" he asked, taking it. "Open it," she said, her eyes gleaming. Inside was a note printed in Ava's unmistakable handwriting, blocky, misshapen letters that spelled out, "You're the best stepdad ever. Can you marry my mom now? I already picked a dress." Drew read it once, then again. He looked up slowly, breath catching somewhere in his chest. Celeste smiled, shy and radiant. "She's been asking me about it for weeks. I told her I'd let you answer." Drew laughed, choked by emotion. "She doesn't waste time, does she?" "No," Celeste said. "She gets that from me." He didn't need to think about it. He didn't need to step away or weigh it against the past. He had already known, deep down, that this was where it was all leading. Every small act of kindness, every moment of courage, every risk they had taken together, It had brought them here. He stepped close, took both of her hands in his, and looked her in the eye. "Yes," he said. "Without question. Yes." Celeste's eyes filled with tears, and the moment lingered just long enough to wrap around them like the warmth of a blanket. Then Ava came barreling into the room with Liam right behind her, both of them out of breath. "Did he say yes?" Ava shouted. "He did," Celeste said. Liam threw his arms in the air and shouted, "Let's go!" The staff erupted in applause, and someone popped the top of a soda bottle in celebration. It wasn't a formal engagement, not the kind with candles and roses, but it was perfect, it was true, and it was entirely theirs. That night, Drew stood in the doorway of Liam's bedroom, watching his son sleep. The room had changed over the past year. The walls were painted blue now, and toy cars lined the shelves. A framed photo of Liam and Ava sat beside the bed, their arms around each other, beaming. Drew stepped in quietly, brushed a curl from Liam's forehead, and whispered good night. Down the hall, Celeste waited in their room, curled on the bed in an oversized sweatshirt, the window open behind her, letting in the cool breeze. She looked up when Drew entered and patted the space beside her. "Think we're ready?" she asked. "For what?" he said, climbing in beside her. "For everything." He wrapped an arm around her and kissed her shoulder. "We already are." They lay in silence for a while, the kind of silence that meant they didn't have to say anything more. Outside, the town settled into night, streetlights flickering on one by one, crickets beginning their slow song. Drew stared up at the ceiling, his hand resting on Celeste's, and thought about everything that had changed. How he had walked into that dealership ready to be humiliated again, expecting nothing more than a polite rejection. How he had broken a window to save a little girl he didn't know, and, in doing so, cracked open his own life, in a way he never could have predicted. He had been laughed at, ignored, underestimated. But the truth had outlasted the noise. In the end, he hadn't needed to convince anyone of his worth. He had simply shown it, moment by moment, until the people around him couldn't help but see it, too. And now here he was, with a partner who believed in him, with a son who admired him, with a daughter he hadn't asked for but had earned, with a place to work, to grow, to lead. He hadn't chased redemption. He had lived into it, every day. Outside, the stars blinked through the trees, and in the house where love had taken root, everything was finally still. And whole.